And joining me live in the studio now is the Nationals Senate Leader Bridget McKenzie, who is also the chair of the Senate inquiry into that Qatar flights decision. The criticism of the inquiry this week has been that while it was great theatre in the last week, it was a lot of colour and movement, you really didn't land a blow against the likes of Goyder and Hudson and Qantas. What did come out of the inquiry? For the critics who might say, fine, the theatre was great, but you didn't really land a punch.
Well, this inquiry would never have had to be set up, Kieran, if the government answered simple questions in question time, produced documents for the Senate, or indeed was upfront with the Australian public their reason they blocked the Qatar Airways flight request. We've had powerful evidence thus far and already gotten powerful results. I mean, you've seen Qantas apologise profusely and repeatedly. That's not because Qantas has suddenly got a new CEO, because prior to her getting that job, she committed to continue as Alan Joyce had been running the company. It's because of this inquiry and shining a light on the egregious behaviour of Qantas and the issues in the aviation sector more generally. We've also had them change their frequent flyer reward system to benefit customers more. We've seen the backflip on the payment of COVID flight credits. So shining a light has actually yielded results. There's a lot more work to be done for the minister when she returns from holidays, which, I'm looking forward to seeing her do.
Well, the minister, but also Alan Joyce, who's on holidays. And I know we're talking about Qatar and Qantas and flipping between the two, but you believe that it's linked because there's a sense that Qantas had made representations on behalf basically to say that Qatar should be blocked, but you haven't landed the person who did that yet. McGuinness, the government representative, the government services representative for Qantas, wasn't there this week.
No, on holidays too.
And neither was Alan Joyce.
That's right, Kieran. So I think when we've narrowed the field of inquiry, we know that Minister King received advice from her department to start the negotiations for additional flights. That's the evidence we got this week. She told Virgin CEO that she's of a mind to approve that application and start that negotiation. That happened in January. Then the minister sits on that decision for 6 months. Something changes. Might be that, yes, planes are being painted and, yes, campaigners are actually being flown for free around the country by Qantas. And she eventually says no to that additional application against the advice of her department. I mean, that's quite incredible. And that is what we know. When we tried to dig deeper, both with Qantas, Mr Goyder, the chair, and the new CEO, Vanessa Hudson, both said it wasn't a decision of them, the board or the new CEO. It was a decision of the previous management. That means Alan Joyce. So there's now 3 people who can only answer the question about why they rejected Qatar Airways: Alan Joyce, Prime Minister, or Catherine King. And that's why the committee's decided to summons Mr Joyce when he returns home.
And have you had any response yet from him that he's likely to show? I know you've said there could be dire consequences because it is a requirement upon anyone summons to a Senate committee, otherwise they could face jail time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not something the Senate does lightly or regularly, but that is the end penalty. You can be held in contempt and there can be either fines or jail terms attached to that finding of contempt.
You'd think he'd show up, obviously.
Well, you'd hope so. And you'd hope Minister King will take up the kind invitation of the committee to come and explain her decision. Because
But you can't compel her because she's a member of the lower house.
No, but there is precedence for members of the House of Representatives fronting up to Senate inquiries and helping us with the questions that the committee may have. I've fronted up to a Senate inquiry. So if you really believe in your decision, it's time now for the minister to actually act on that and front up and answer the questions. Because Australians, this is an issue that I think has really tapped into the frustration of everyday Australians who want to be able to afford a ticket, who want their planes to take off and land on time, for their bags to end up in the same place they are when they get off the plane. I mean, this is bread and butter issues. I think the government's been very caught on the flat foot, if you like, in not really appreciating how frustrated Australians are, not just with Qantas, but with the aviation sector that's not working for them.
Well, and this Qatar decision has come, well, it's a perfect storm, really, at the same time that you've got this debacle in Qantas of the 1,700 illegally sacked workers, those ghost flights you alluded to earlier, the huge remuneration, possibly this golden handshake as well for Alan Joyce, despite the brand damage to Qantas. So this Qatar decision, it needs to be seen in that context, doesn't it?
It does. And what was the quid pro quo for this government running the protection racket for Qantas, whilst all that negative behaviour and that poor corporate behaviour has been exhibited by Qantas? Why would a government be running a protection racket? It begs the question, was it the close personal and professional relationship between the Prime Minister and the former CEO? Is it the political quid pro quo around support for the Yes campaign at a critical time? I mean, these are serious questions because this big government seems to be very, very close to a very big corporate and it's having perverse outcomes for the everyday Australian traveller. So the test, I think, for Catherine King when she gets back off holidays tomorrow, she can do three things tomorrow. She can reinstate the ACCC monitoring of our aviation industry that they cancelled so that we get real-time data on cancellations and delays. She can actually review the decision into Qatar. Australians want this reviewed. If she ends up in the same place, fine, but tell us the reasons. That's all the evidence we've had to the committee. And tomorrow, there's a decision she could make tomorrow to get more flexibility for flights in and out of Sydney Airport. Yeah. It's been sitting on her desk for months. And that would really help with cancellations and delays.
Well, that's a no-brainer, that last one, because for viewers who might not be right across the detail of that, basically Qantas has been gaming those slots essentially, so smaller airlines can't be running on those domestic flight routes,
absolutely.
Sydney to Canberra, Sydney to Melbourne, and so on, therefore less choice, costs are higher.
That's right, and passengers are left sitting in the airport for hours whilst they're bumped to the next flight, and it's called slot hoarding. You know, we knew it was an issue. We commissioned a report by the former PC Commissioner, Peter Harris. He delivered that before the election. The government's department's done consultation on that, and the evidence to our committee was it's ready to go. Okay. These are decisions that shouldn't wait for the white paper in 18 months. They could be made tomorrow.
So this is some competition reform
absolutely
out of the committee that you...
Yeah.
I guess, so that's another response to the suggestion that nothing has come out of it, because if you do land that is quite a big improvement in terms of competition on those very busy routes.
Well, I mean, Labor's saying nothing's come out of it, but things have absolutely changed. Qantas's behaviour has changed. Virgin's behaviour has changed as a result of it. And the department, despite being gagged by their minister, has actually revealed that there was a positive decision sitting on her desk. She didn't support it, and also that there are changes that can be made right now to help Australian travellers.
Well, let's hope that the minister does at the very least move on that slot hoarding question, because that, as we said, is a no-brainer. Should Richard Goyder follow Alan Joyce out the door?
Well,
should he go as the Qantas chair?
Well, I've always said, Kieran, I mean, we've exposed a lot of issues in the Qantas group's behaviour as a corporate citizen. The media's also exposed a lot of that. At the end of the day, that is a decision for shareholders. They're going to be having their meeting, I think, early November, and it'll be up to them. When you're a shareholder, you want to see prices going up, your dividends being in the positive, not the negative, and under the current administration, Qantas shares are obviously not going in the right direction.
But Richard Goyder seemed to suggest his benchmark for staying is simply approval of the largest shareholders. He said 14 of the 20 biggest want him to stay. But aren't there other metrics upon which business leaders should judge their performance and whether or not they should stay or go, i.e.
customer satisfaction
or demolishing your brand as well?
Well, I think that's been the really tragic thing. I mean, we all want to be proud of Qantas. I think Australians have a soft spot for Qantas, despite their behaviour, and want that reputation restored. Now, was it the former CEO's reputation, or is that the responsibility of the board? So the fact that the quid pro quo between the Prime Minister and Qantas does seem to be the relationship between Joyce and Albanese, not Goyder, and that was the evidence very clearly to the committee. Mr Goyder does seem to be a chair of large companies that likes really backs his CEO, whether it's Gil McLachlan in the AFL, who had a very long goodbye. His last speech was yesterday at the AFL Grand Final, but it has been 12 months of sayonara. And Alan Joyce, I think, also had prepared a 2-month goodbye tour to only be cut short by senators. So I think Mr Goyder is going to be considering his position, but ultimately that's a matter for shareholders.
Okay. Now, a few other matters. As a prominent Victorian politician, I've got to get your reaction to Daniel Andrews. His departure, as you had a sigh there, I think many people would have a sigh of relief. But as you know, he had a big win last November. So a lot of Victorians also love the former Premier. What's his legacy?
Well, the legacy piece was the thing that I sort of go to. It's $116 billion of debt. It's a cancelled Commonwealth Games, which, we're embarrassed as Victorians about that because we're a great sporting event state, and we've been embarrassed on the global stage by that. And I think you've got cancellations and delays across infrastructure projects. You've got the longest lockdowns in the world during COVID, and we're still seeing the repercussions, particularly now young people, of those lockdowns. And I think his legacy is one of division and degradation. And I hope the new Premier will set herself up for success, that she'll, work with the federal government to find an Australian solution to hosting the Commonwealth Games and repairing. We've heard through another inquiry that the Gold Coast is keen to help, so she could take the leadership there, that she'd cancel the suburban rail loop. I mean, I think by the time that project, that hasn't been through a cost-benefit analysis, is completed, it's $250 billion. That's actually going to be the same amount of debt in the same time frame. So she could cancel that and stand up to the CFMMEU so that our infrastructure projects are actually delivered on time and on budget.
I know it's not the entire story, but the opposition's lack of unity has also been a gift. And there's various arguments to say that's because Andrews was so good that he didn't enable them to get their act together, or simply that they just were unable to have any sense of unity. But it's pivotal, isn't it, now that with the departure of such a big figure, for the opposition to keep unified if they're going to be viable in 3 years from now?
Yeah, well, it's about being unified, obviously, and having a unified proposition for the public to vote for, but it's also having a suite of policies that you're committed to and that are going to make a difference for people on the ground. I mean, the National Party at the last state election had an exceptional result. We won back 3 seats from independents. We've grown our numbers in the Victorian Parliament by having a clear proposition for Victorians to vote for. And I hope that the Liberal Party can also have the same thing going forward, because Victorians deserve better than they've had in the last few years.
We're less than 2 weeks away from the referendum. The polls, the major polls, have about a 20% gap. I don't remember any election, referendum or otherwise, where a gap of that magnitude has been overcome in the final fortnight. This thing is over, isn't it?
Well, it's not over till it's over, Kieran, and you and I have been around long enough to know that anything can happen. And I know the Yes campaign has got millions and millions and millions of dollars to still throw at this thing.
But this would be unprecedented in every democratic election if a poll gap of that size was to be overcome.
Well, what is unprecedented is a referendum question getting up that doesn't have bipartisan support in this country. And unfortunately, the Prime Minister has chosen to not make this about recognition, but to fundamentally change governance arrangements through enshrining a voice in the Constitution. If this was a referendum about recognising First Australians in the Constitution, A, it would have bipartisan support, and B, I think in excess of 95% of Australians would be voting yes.
So does the opposition have to take some of the accountability too? Because the polling, since Peter Dutton announced he's opposing it, polling has fallen off a cliff. So that the point you make is right. You need bipartisanship.
But so why didn't the Prime Minister carve the question out? Have the first question on this be a referendum on recognition of First Australians in our founding document, and a second and subsequent later referenda be about enshrining a voice in the Constitution. By locking those two together,
that's not what the Indigenous people had wanted.
That's not what the very select group of Indigenous people he's been consulting with want. let's not forget that there are very prominent and significant Indigenous Australians who are voting no. So it's not all Indigenous Australians are voting yes. There are significant numbers who will be voting no. They want recognition, but they don't like the voice.
Senator McKenzie, thanks as always.
Always.